tells you a lot about how much technology has changed in the last sort of like 10, 15 years. If you think about it, the first iPhone was in 2007. We now all have iPhones. Last year, ChatGPT was released. That's had massive implications. And all these changes have an impact on how we campaign. And one area that we've been really interested in is TikTok, which reached 1 billion users in 2021. So this is not to be underestimated, it is a thing. And that's basically why we are here today. So why did we commission this research? So I have said this much more eloquently in the foreword to the report, but this is the rundown, which is a bit more fun. So essentially, we were hearing lots of people being like, what should we do about TikTok? TikTok's a thing. People are talking about politics and campaigns on TikTok. What do we do about it? And we had these conversations again and again with all the people we knew across the ecosystem. And then we were like, okay, we should do something about TikTok, or at least try and understand what is going on TikTok. And I think what's really interesting is it really changes a lot of the dynamics of campaigning. You know, it's created a new form of meme. Anybody seen the sea shanties? You know, that's a completely different way of doing memes. When I grew up, memes were like words on pictures. Now they are a lot more than that. Also, like people are now using TikTok to search for news. They are like asking questions of it. Again, that is a really important thing that fundamentally shifts how we're campaigning. And also this sense of like transferability, like what goes on in TikTok also leaks into other platforms. You'll see lots of TikToks being shared off platform. So it really is changing like the medium through which we communicate. So that is a little bit about why we commissioned this. And we've got an amazing panel here today to talk through the research from Root Cause Global, who did the research. They are amazing. They do lots of really interesting things with AI, but they will be better at talking this through than me. And then, we've also got practitioner perspective. So just to introduce our panel before I hand over to them, we're going to start with Dr. John Bryder, who is basically has done lots of the research. He's worked in social media analysis for over 10 years. As executive director of the Observatory on Social Media at Indiana University. He did a lot of work on vaccine misinformation, which was actually cited in the president's report, which is really cool. So he's done a lot of kind of network mapping and researching social media. Jonathan Tanner, who's the founder of Root Cause Global, who led this research, has a strong record in communications and strategy, and basically hosted this amazing podcast. You should check it out, Government versus the Robots, which was looking at how technology will affect politics in the future. And then we've got Anisha Chowdhury, who's a communications strategist who's worked with lots of different progressive political movements and trade unions. And she's going to be talking a little bit about how she's experimented with TikTok as a campaign medium and her thoughts on it, and whether like what we found in the report kind of matches the practice of the everyday. So I'm really excited. We'll have time for questions. We'll also have time afterwards for all of you to get to know each other and add to our research board. So handing over to John.
Thanks very much. Okay, well, thanks for coming out in the rain, everybody. It's a bit of a typical February day, so it's good to see you all. So I'm going to talk now about the work we did trying to study how people talk about UK politics on TikTok. I just wanted to start with a quick question. I just wondered if you could raise your hand if you are a user of TikTok. About half of you. So maybe need to talk a little bit about what TikTok is. It's mainly a platform where people share videos, and what you do is you sit there, and if you like the video, you watch it, and if you don't like it, you scroll up and the next video appears, and it predicts which videos you will like for its fancy algorithm. So you don't really get to choose which people to follow so much. It's more there's a For You page which recommends content for you to view. And it becomes very addictive because it's actually very good at predicting what you'll want to see. It's become quite widely used in the UK. There's 23 million users. News and current affairs are quite popular. and increasingly a lot of politics is being viewed on the platform. We wanted to understand what kind of content is being viewed, what's out there, what works well, what political messaging works well, which issues are more popular, which issues are less popular, etc., etc. We've got a little TikTok just for you. So he's talking about having Coke addict. Coca-Cola addict, yeah, anyway. So that was quite a popular TikTok. Oops. So a little about how we built the sample. We are focusing on Rishi's premiership. We started October 2022. So the method we use starts with one simple hashtag, which was UK politics. And we snowball from that. We look for other hashtags that appear with UK politics. We record those, and then we add new hashtags to our list, and then we end up with a big list of hashtags that hopefully covers all of the UK politics content. We're pretty happy. We got 60,000 videos downloaded, which we cleaned a bit. We ended up with 13,000 key videos, which had 761 million plays, which is 17 plays per voter in the UK. So this is quite an influential amount of content. Just to comment that this is limited to only contain videos that use hashtags, and there are a few out there that don't, but mainly they do use hashtags. A little bit about how we studied the videos, and there's a picture there of the actual process going on. We used the descriptions and comments on TikTok videos because we found those to be good ways of understanding what the content was. To avoid kind of our own biases, we used a large language model to build the classification system of the videos. And we gave it 2 dimensions. We wanted to know what people are talking about, which the issues are. But we're also interested in how people are talking about it, the narrative angles. Is it critical or is it promotional, etc., etc. And then given this classification scheme, we then used another large language model, which is kind of ChatGPT, to actually classify the videos. It's picking out the videos and assigning them to different categories. Just a little bit of context about a couple of terms we're going to use. The difference between reach and engagement. So when you're flicking through the videos on TikTok, you'll view a video. That will just be give the reach of the videos, the number of people who've actually seen the video. Whereas you can actually physically like a video, or you can comment on a video on TikTok. And that's a kind of form of engagement. So there are 2 different things going on, and there's quite an interesting difference between those different ways that people consume the content. So let's focus on narrative angles. So there are various different ways that videos talked about issues. They could be critical of policy or political parties. They could be promotional of people. They could be quite factual in their approach. They could use humor or satire, or maybe have a debate about something. So the top narrative content here, we've got over half of all the videos that were created were actually criticising politicians. You can see this is the percentage of videos tagged as a narrative angle. Most of them are about criticism. But when we look at the number of plays, it's still quite high on criticism, but this factual informative category does actually do quite well. And we'll come back to that later. Interesting to see that promotion does not do very well. It's not good to say, hey, everybody, vote for Rishi, whatever. Doesn't work. So now that way of looking at things is looking at all these big buckets of videos And what can happen on TikTok is that a few videos get most of the plays, and it can skew the results. So we don't easily get a picture of how the different narrative angles are performing. When we want to look at a performance of a narrative angle, we actually want to look at typical videos. So did some science there, and yeah, science babies, and try to estimate the median number of plays of typical videos. When we do that, we get quite an interesting story. The best performing videos were actually factual, informative videos. These are just videos that tell the story in a dry way, the news reports, and these performed a lot better than the policy criticism, political conduct, and the worst performing was criticism of political parties. So that was kind of an interesting takeaway. And the sort of take homes from this kind of analysis is that we want to focus on the factual and informative content. Critical videos, when you do put them out, perform best towards policies rather than towards individuals. But party criticism performs particularly badly. But when we look in terms of engagement, so this is like the number of comments that some typical videos are getting, the critical videos are doing a lot better. So if you want a lot of engagement on your videos, being critical of people, stirring things up seems to get a lot more people typing away on the videos. Okay, so moving on to issues. We again let the large language model pull out which of the issues were there in the videos. And we've got economic, social, government, foreign policy, environmental, and another one which doesn't really indeterminate. You couldn't really tell what the issue really was. So we analysed that in the same sort of way. If you read the report, there's much more information about that. But the take homes of this was that cost of living was the key factor here, with more than 20% of all plays. That's what people were interested in. There are lots of videos talking about corruption, but they didn't perform too well in terms of plays and likes. So there's lots of attacks on corruption, people generating these videos, but they didn't perform particularly well. In terms of reach, so the cost of living and public finance is the most important. And in terms of engagement, we found that immigration stood out, which kind of is a bit sad, but that's the contentious topic that people tended to comment on. Okay, a little bit complicated, this figure, but I'll just take you through it. We looked at different politicians, and we're trying to find out which of the narrative angles were associated with particular politicians. So you can see here the different politicians on who were in the sample, way ahead from everyone else, which you see that who had like, well, I don't know, about 30% of the plays. And also with nobody was highly performing. But Rishi was generally being criticised for their policy and actual informative videos about Rishi Sunak. Quite interesting to see that Boris Johnson was picked up on his politician conduct. He did quite strongly. But Boris Johnson has fallen off. He was quite popular before the Rishi Sunak took over, and now there are very few videos about Boris Johnson. So if you look at the report, you'll find there's more about how the different issues paired up with different narrative angles. So we talked about that in more detail. We talked about how different politicians perform different issues. And we also look at who are the big content creators, so who create the most content and who got the most plays. So just sort of like taking a quick step back, and I know Jonathan's going to talk a bit more about this, but it seemed to me, looking at the way that the plays of videos, the typical videos were performing, that people are most interested in sort of the bottom line, really. It's like your pocket, the cost of living in your pocket, and the public finances, how much money the government has. And these were the issues that really motivated people. Less interested in criticism, personality, or party politics, and more interested in factual content. Okay, so thank you, everyone. That's the findings.
Thank you, John. And yeah, we will get a chance to do questions later because we've obviously looked towards that. So I'm sure you've all got lots of questions. We're now going to hand it over to Jonathan, who's going to take us through the main takeaways and findings from the report. I am also going to attempt to move the camera. So those of you online, things are going to move.
Just getting the mic for the benefit of the people online. Thanks very much, John, and thanks, Hannah, as well. It was a few years ago, I think, that we first met, and you've been a real supporter of the kind of, Hannah was calling on everybody here to, if you've got a mad idea, lead in. And 2 years ago, Root Cause was just a mad idea. Now it's still a mad idea, but it's evolved a bit. And Hannah was really supportive then in terms of making introductions, the kind of weaved in and out of the Speaker House, which provides a great support network. To John and others. So, Hannah, thanks to you and to Campaign Up for kind of encouraging us on our journey as well as encouraging this work. Root Cause was born out of a podcast that I used to host called Government versus the Robots. And through that process of kind of picking the brains of experts all around the world, I guess, I became convinced that data science had a huge amount to offer strategic communications. And at that time, I was working in communications roles in politics and think tanks. And I thought it was kind of getting to the point where data science would become an integral part of how we approach communications and campaigning in the future, especially given the kind of looming arrival of AI. And that means I need to say another thank you, this time to John, or Dr. John, to give him his full title, which he doesn't always like to own, but I'll do it for him. John's been instrumental in kind of proving to me and watching Root Cause prove that point of how AI and data can inform strategic communications. And it's a real privilege to watch someone work up close who's not just wrangling with the data, but also wrangling with the AI, and patient enough to teach somebody else whilst they're also doing the work. And I've learned a huge amount, not just on this, but on the work we've done on AI and climate change. And in spite of being completely wrong about lots of things we work on together, I am grateful you proved that I wasn't completely wrong about the data AI strategic comms thing. Anyway, with all that out of the way, TikTok. So as John said, TikTok really does matter when it comes to politics. 20 million users, not just young people. I think a Reuters report on news said that over 20% of TikTok users now regularly use the platform for news. And they also, interestingly, are much more likely to trust influencers than brands. So that in itself, I think, is an interesting, one of many interesting TikTok conundrums that fall out of the work that we've done. And obviously, I think you can't really talk about TikTok without referencing the policy environment that it exists in. TikTok, there's a lot not to like about TikTok as a company, but that is true of every major social media company and every major technology company. So if we hold our noses, TikTok is really important, especially in such a big election year. And one of the stats that sort of jumps out to me from the report is that the average video in our sample, or a typical video in our sample, is being shared away from TikTok to platforms like Facebook or WhatsApp 7 times. So a political TikTok, you can expect it to be shared 7 times on average. And that will be going into other platforms. So what happens on TikTok doesn't stay on TikTok. Even if you subscribe to the theory that we're all moving away from the big digital public sphere, town square, and we all want to retreat into our coffee houses. I saw some Matt McGregor saying in The Economist this week. even if we are doing that, TikTok is still driving content into those more private spaces. You know, in just the same way that media used to drive content onto social media, there are connections between all of these platforms. None of them existed in isolation. So when you look at the report, you'll see that we've made a series of recommendations for progressive campaigners and communicators. And these, I'm not going to talk about them in great detail because Tron has talked about how they came together, and Anish has got like way more useful stuff to say about how to use TikTok. If we summarise the recommendations, the first one is like don't dumb things down. We know that factual content, we saw in the presentation, factual content performs really well relative to other types of content. And also don't talk people down. There's not a lot to be gained from slagging people off, however tempting it is. Do politics, but don't do party politics. And aim for quality over quantity. Like, one of the really exciting things about TikTok is you don't need a big following, or actually a big team, to get a lot of views. You know, there are people who regularly get hundreds of thousands of views, and you go and look how many followers they've got, it's about 1,000. And so, for people working in social media campaigns, that quandary of, well, we don't have the platform, we don't have the existing reach, that doesn't apply with TikTok, which I think is quite exciting from an innovation perspective. And then lastly, and again, this is kind of the final section of the report, but when we looked into who's making the content that's succeeding on TikTok, we can really see the glaring absence of traditional media. There's barely any print media names in the sample. And like from broadcast, there's Sky News and LBC. And then there's a few kind of like new kids on the block, I guess, if you like, Politics Joe, Novara, Pink News are in there as well. But I think it's fair to say that there's much more scope for influencers on TikTok than almost any other social platform I'm aware of. And that's backed up by TikTok users telling us that they trust influencers more. And it's backed up by the fact that there's an absence of media. So if we see this world of kind of, where people are accessing traditional news less and less, the TikTok space is there to be taken. And the nice thing is you don't need you don't need to spend the last 3 years building an audience and getting it taken away by Elon Musk to succeed. These recommendations, which they kind of made me reflect on the bigger picture a little bit. And given that we are heading into what's going to be an important year from an election point of view, I just want to share a couple of wider observations that I think kind of fall out from these recommendations. So the first is that don't dumb things down and like don't talk people down. There is another way, maybe not another way of putting it because the facts support that, but there's another way of thinking about it. And that is to say, like, don't focus on the negatives, stop pointing out problems, start engaging with solutions. You know, we're coming through a period where it's been really quite hard and dispiriting at times to have progressive views and be doing progressive campaigning. And we've got really used to, like, with good reason most of the time, complaining about the state of the nation. And that kind of approach, like, doesn't work on TikTok if you're thinking about useful TikTok examples, but it isn't going to get us very far if this year there is a change of government. You know, we found with our root cause work on framing AI, that one of the most important things that was missing from the whole debate about what the role of AI in society should be was a positive vision about the future based on shared values. And I think there's something about the findings about how to do TikTok well, where there's evidence that actually speaks to that bigger picture of the need to flip the coin and spend time thinking about, like, painting a picture of the world as we want it to be, rather than being strongly reactionary to the world as it is. And there is synergy between those recommendations and that perspective. And then, secondly, like, the weak performance of established media on TikTok is symptomatic of wider changes in the information environment. So journalism as an industry is going through a tricky time. Democracy as a system of government is going through a tricky time, and there's probably a relationship between those two things, among many other factors. And we know that we're seeing a huge amount of fragmentation in where people get their information from, and the rise in the number of, or the kind of collapse of the gatekeeping function that professional journalism used to play in the information environment just kind of disappears. And these shifts like point to the need to think hard about how we evolve the model of what skills and relationships people working in campaigns or communications need to have in order to be successful in reaching their audiences. And obviously, you know, the root cause approach and the kind of work that John's been pioneering is a kind of applied example of that way of thinking. And I just want to reinforce the role that artificial intelligence has played in this research, because rightly, you know, we have lots of conversations about getting AI right and ethical dimensions. There's a lot to consider, but you know, amongst friends with political technologists, you know, AI has made it possible for root cause to generate quantitative evidence-based insights. Like all of these recommendations in the report have numbers behind them. If you read the report, there's numbers linked to them. There's evidence, it's not just instinct about what works. That's taken from a massive amount of data in a really short time, so short that it has alarmed people that are used to working in longer time frames. And it's been done at an affordable cost as well. And that's just one use of artificial intelligence technology in a kind of progressive campaigns democracy space. There's so many other opportunities, whether that's bringing transparency to legislative processes, analysing legislation as it unfolds, summaries on amendments, implications of amendments, analysing proprietary data that we all have in the organisations we work for to get a sense of like what works within the organisation on knowledge management or M&E, or working out, like we have here, how to get your message across effectively on a range of social media. And our hope is that by continuing to look at a range of platforms, so with root cause we've now done work looking at TikTok, YouTube, doing a bit of exploratory work on Substack, have done some work on Twitter but face the same problems everybody else is, and looking at mainstream media as well. By being able to bring a kind of investigative approach to all of those platforms, we can start to build a bit of a library of what's actually proven to work and succeed. And if we can start to build that library and make it accessible and make it available to people working to try and make the world a better place, then we feel like that'll be a great thing to be doing. So if we want to make the world a better place, we won't get there without making a case for innovation. And I know from bitter experience, and I'm sure some people in the room share this bitter experience, that making a case for communications and investment in communications and outreach is pretty tough. Let alone making the case for innovation in communications, which will feel speculative. And if you're talking about platforms like TikTok, it's likely to probably going to be coming from someone younger, and then they're asking for money, and it gets hard. It is tough making the case to innovate in progressive organisations, but it's worth it. Like, fight the good fight, because whether it's using AI to improve democratic outcomes, or it's starting up a new TikTok account so you can put some of these recommendations into practice, it is going to be making a difference. It is a fight worth having. So, kind of big up to innovation, boo to business as usual. Scan the QR code, read the report. We're going to be sharing it on social media tomorrow, so please do help us out by sharing it as well. Share what you find interesting, and look forward to the conversation. And I'm now just going to kick back and let some stuff on Alicia.
I'm not sure if Jonathan up later. Oh, right. This is fine. So, hi everyone, I'm Alicia, and it's hyped me up a lot, but now I have to live up to that. But I've got a few sort of findings and things that I've tried before that I think work. But just to start off with, I wanted to reflect a little bit on what's been said about the report. And the reason why it's so exciting is it is some of the first data of its kind, on UK politics and the scene that is on TikTok in UK politics. I'm not going to lie, I don't think there is as huge of a scene on UK politics as there is on other platforms yet, right? But it will happen. That might be because, politicians and campaigners are scared to get in front of the camera. What if they go viral for something stupid? Or, it's also harder than just getting your comms assistant to write a bit of copy and hit tweet. But at the end of the day, it's going to happen and it's got to be done. The cross-platform thing is interesting as well. I think, it makes a lot of sense. We like to share to platforms that we've been on for longer, we're more familiar with them, we've maybe cultivated political communities on those platforms, and we want to share TikTok content with them. But I think as TikTok builds those communities, will get stronger on TikTok, and there'll be more of an ecosystem within TikTok, maybe. And obviously, the data is great. It's an arm's length look at what's going on, but it does open up the door to delve a little bit deeper into how, the platform works and who uses it. So to start off with, you obviously will know that broadly, people who use TikTok are young, but I would ask you to think of them more as an audience of individuals, right? So these audience of individuals, they're looking for relatable content. It's not just about self-expression, it's about self-discovery when it comes to TikTok and TikTok content. You know yourself from the half of you in the room who have TikTok, you know that feeling of when you're like, God, my For You page knows me better than I do, right? That's the thing that's unique to TikTok. But how does it do that? We touched on it a little bit before, but it's through obviously the magic mystical algorithm. But the way that it works is obviously there's zero onboarding when it comes to TikTok. You just get the platform and you start scrolling and it does the work. You don't have to spend ages agonizing over who to follow and what that says about you, sort of thing. So the difference is the traditional audiences, if you would like, are sort of my loyal Instagram followers who know me, who like all my posts. There's a level of buy-in there, and I get a lot of engagement from that. But the new individual audience means that I can have 0 followers and get my content onto 1 million screens in one night. And that is obviously a load of reach, but it's not necessarily engagement. And I think there's something to think about in terms of what's more important for you and your organization. But obviously, we're trying to think of why it's so hard for organizations to break through on TikTok. If you ask a teenager, they might say it's because I can't identify with your content, right? So this election year, the question is to ask yourself is, what does watching and interacting with your content say about the individual watching or interacting with it, right? So to interrogate that further, I've put together sort of like 4 things to start thinking about based on some key ideas in the report. And that starts off with, do you really know your audience, right? Broadly that people get on TikTok, but who is your audience? Who are you trying to speak to? Because once you know them, you can make them the center of your narrative. So an example is, are you going out to the protest this weekend? If so, here's 5 ways not to end up on the Met Police Twitter account. And that kind of immediately puts you in the center of the conversation. It forces you to have a thought and an opinion and make a judgment straight away. And then it allows you to go softly into talking about maybe the protest bill, if that's what you want to talk about. But you immediately captured someone's attention and put it at the center of the conversation. The second thing is, can you get granular? The fun of TikTok is how niche and how deep you can get into these silos of content, right? So the more granular you can get, the better. Forget everything you know about writing a press release quote. It's very hard, let's start that work. But doing here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the hope, that kind of thing. Just forget it. Get comfortable with posing the question, right? So I saw a really good example on TBC TikTok where someone asked, I'm a carer and I've got a question for the government. Why don't you like me? That's immediately allowing someone to put themselves in the conversation and also talk about a subsection or an issue that they're interested in. The third thing is, have you considered all the features at your disposal? So if we start with something like the comment section, people who use TikTok, that the comment section has a life of its own. You can think one thing about a video, look at the comments and feel completely different about its content. So I think that's another interesting thing to think about. There's even a blue comment now that turns your comment into, if it's popular enough, it turns it into a search button, so you can click on it and get lost in these really intense rabbit holes of context. But if you're integrating that into your content, you can deepen interest in what you're talking about or a topic and create buy-in to that topic. I saw it get done recently on a Politics Joe video on TikTok where someone on Question Time was talking about Brexit and the blue comment was Brexit consequence. And I'm like, God, it's really quite boring. But, that's what some people want to delve into and want to talk about. The fourth thing, and the thing that I find really super difficult to do, is ask yourself, am I being too precious with my content? Because I know we work hard and we make content, we want it to do well, but I wouldn't study what works, obviously study what works, but don't dwell too hard on what doesn't, because most of it won't. But the key is to try as many things as you can, you know. Is it myth busting videos that gets your audience going? You know, is it, I saw a 3-minute video of someone explaining the context of a video of JFK, like, you know, whatever it is. TikTok wants you to find your niche, it wants you to stick to it. It will happen, you know, it has happened to me, making videos of strikes, the NEU going on strikes, you know, they did really well. People seem to love those chants because they sound kind of like football songs. But, you know, just find your niche and keep it going. And just to wrap up in terms of general thoughts, platforms like X elevate conflict and division in order to get engagement. TikTok, for now, from what we can see, doesn't necessarily operate like that. So what you do want to do moving forward making content is talk to the individual, talk to them in a non-conflicting way. What you don't want, talk to them in a non-conflicting way, talk to them in a personal way, like they're an individual, not necessarily like they're an entire massive group of people. Jonathan also asked me to talk about what I'd love to see next. And I think, you know, I'd like to see how we can use data to start grouping communities on TikTok when it is so individualized, and how we, you know, figure out whether does young actually always mean left wing, and does blue hair actually always mean going to vote green? Like, how can we use data to figure those things out and inform our practice in the future and make it easier to, I guess, speak to those people?
Brill. Thank you so much, everybody. That was an amazing panel. And what you'll see there was an academic, and somebody who set up an organization to look at AI, and a practitioner. And that's where the magic happens, literally. The fact that we're able to have all 3 voices on the panel and everybody like focusing on one issue or problem, like that's how we solve. So yeah, thank you everybody for your contributions. We're now going to go to questions. This is going to be slightly tricky because we are balancing online questions with in-person questions, but I'm going to do my best. Daniel over there is helping me by WhatsApping me questions from the chat. But in the room, would anybody like to start with our first question? Cool. I will take 3 in the room and then allow the speakers to respond. And then I will do 3 online and then I'll go back to 3 in the room. We've got lots of time, so don't worry. So cool. Andy, you've had your hand up first. And then, yeah, I'm going to take the next 2.
Yeah, amazing talk. Thanks so much for delivering it. I had a question about your methodology. Nigel Farage went viral for his kind of cameo appearance where he was selling customized messages for like 50, 100 quid, however much it was. How did you balance the mocking of those kind of custom messages with the wider political content? How did you manage to filter that out with, you know, on a hashtag Nigel Farage compared to, that was a cameo video compared to a hashtag Nigel Farage that was a genuine piece of rhetoric from him?
Cool. Thank you for that, Andy. We're going to take 2 more, and then if you guys want to note down. For people who are online, the question was, how do you balance the fact that cameo messages from Nigel Farage did really well, and they were very much take the piss with some of the findings in the report? I think that was the main question. Do people online hear the people in the room or not? Someone could give me a thumbs up if you can, or, okay. I'm going to assume not. Right. Do you like to ask a question?
Yeah. So I kind of, thanks so much for the chat. It's like really interesting. I loved it. We work in like political organising as well for like non-profit campaigning, as I presume most people in the group do. And I kind of had a quick look at the report as well when you kind of thrown it up, and it was quite significant that Keir Starmer had basically no political footprint on TikTok, which is not surprising to many of us. But do you think that has like I know you can't see into the future, but would you say that for instance, has like particular, is a bad sign for basically youth turnout for Labour? Do you think it's a bad sign for youth turnout overall? Do you think that has any implication for basically how young people or TikTok users are going to be voting?
Great, that's a good question. I have been told that they can hear on the chat, which is great. So we don't need to repeat that. Last question in the room. We'll take you. Yes.
Thank you, that was so interesting. And I know we started to touch on data at the end. I'm really interested in what demographic data we can extract already from the platform. And if you match that against your findings, do you see a difference? And I guess I was quite interested to hear that like news shows aren't big on TikTok, whereas I've been quite alarmed by like the growth rate of GB News. And I'm just wondering, are we actually seeing, because there's more young people on TikTok, we see it's kind of skewing the data, and actually there's like a subsection of an older audience that is kind of behaving quite differently, and just interested in what we know from the platform.
Great. So would you guys like to respond to those three very good questions? Let's start. Who wants to kick off? John?
I can briefly talk about Nigel.
Okay. We might have to move a bit with mics.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. A couple of responses to that. We stopped data collection around the end of October, November, which was before the Cameo started, I believe.
I think it started in 2021.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah.
In that case, because of the way the classification works, if it had been just a cameo and the description was that it was a cameo, it would have been classified as such, and it wouldn't have fallen into any of the interesting categories. But I was not aware of too many Nigel Farage cameo videos, to be honest. We did look a bit at Nigel Farage's account, and the hashtag did get sampled, so that was definitely there. I'll double check that in the data.
There was another
Demographics, I can deal with and then pass on to that for back here to someone else. That's a very good point. I wish there was a better way of just looking at the data to see what the demographics were of the viewers. Maybe we can look at the commenters and get an estimates for get some kind of picture of what their demographic backgrounds are. But I do know that there is a heavy skew towards under 40, and sort of like half as many people over 40 than under 40 using TikTok. So you do see a big skew towards the younger audience, which is, I mean, fine. I mean, it's what it is. I mean, it's the way TikTok, we have to think about TikTok as something that is used by younger audiences. So I'll pass on to Jonathan.
I think there's a bit of thread to pieces of these questions. And that is, so just on the Nigel Farage question, I remember me and John having a conversation literally about Nigel Farage, but he gets mentioned in that section of the report. And we looked at him, so he doesn't use hashtags. So as John sets out, we built our sample through hashtags. TikTok's own search has really significant limitations, so hashtagging is the best way, but if it hasn't got a hashtag, it's not our sample. And Nigel Farage knows that, because like whatever he's up to, he isn't using hashtags anymore. And when he went in the jungle, he started producing really polished TikToks for reasons unknown, except perhaps the increasing number of old people starting to engage with TikTok, amongst other things. So that is to say, like methodology-wise, and also to get into, I think I'm right in saying, John will correct me if I'm wrong, to stay in our sample, you have to have 2 hashtags, because otherwise you end up like with really random stuff, like politics from other countries and so on. So part of the data cleaning is 2 hashtags. So even just the hashtag Nigel Farage wouldn't have made it in, it had to be Nigel Farage or something else. So there are undoubtedly pockets of politically significant behaviour that is kind of unmonitorable through this method. That links to GB News. GB News is like a massive ethic problem. But it is also symptomatic of like something that we've seen over the last 10 years. There are some powerful people with a lot of money who know how to play this game, right? And the the role that GB News appears to be playing, I've seen their presenters describing it as a movement. Like they literally describe GB News as a movement. And like whether it's the Fox playbook, like whatever it is, like I'm alarmed by it too, but we didn't see it in the sample for the report. But I'd be very happy to have a conversation about like how you actually counteract it, and what that looks like, and what is a coordinated strategy for that, and what does the rest of the community actually look like, because it is a cause of concern. Yes, there's a thread there that links to vision, I think, and like for me, somebody very wise who may or may not be sat next to me once said to me, like, basically, if you're not a meme, no one's going to care about you on social media. Keir Starmer is not yet a meme, and the only memes that I think to create around it are kind of around dryness, which may not be a bad thing, but anyone who's familiar with James Milner's profile on Twitter might think that maybe Keir Starmer's got something to learn from that. But for me, actually, the point about Keir, I don't know about them, I can say that I've got really but this point of having visions for the future and actually saying what do we want to do and what are the problems and what are the trade-offs and where are we trying to work towards, like that, I don't think they're really making an effort on TikTok. I presume that they've got a reason for that. But if they were, like that vision, which we think might work quite well on TikTok, currently doesn't seem to be punching through anywhere else in the information environment either.
Yeah, it's interesting that thing about methodology. I actually had a thought when I was first reading, I think it's a line on page 5, talking about how, like you said, you ignored things that were super, super viral because you thought that it skewed the results, which absolutely makes sense. But in terms of learnings for your own, like, social media and TikToks and things, do you have, I believe there's a lot more that you can learn from one video that goes viral than 10 bang average videos. And I think you should probably refer to studying that and what was good about that. That's not to invalidate what was found. Obviously, that tells a story about what narratives work. But I think on TikTok, that's an important thing to keep in mind, that one of viral success is really crucial to the nature of the platform. And then, yeah, moving on to Keir. He is a bit boring, and you know it's hard to be fun when you're boring, and I do get that. The thing about TikTok, they ban political advertising, so I think it's kind of annoying for politicians because they're like, I can't put money into targeting everyone in an SW9 postcode and see who goes out to vote based on that, you know. So I think that's why they're kind of not putting effort into organic content on there, but I think there's value in it in the sense that if you do manage to get big on TikTok, you will get big on Instagram and you will get big on X. Like it just will translate if you have good video on TikTok. And I think that if that happens during a campaign, can give the image of like a living, breathing, alive and kicking campaign with someone who is compelling and people do want to click on for whatever reason. So yeah, I think there is value in it, and yeah, it's just it's harder to monitor than, for example, political ads and getting people door knocking and putting leaflets through the door. All of that stuff is easier to monitor in terms of how that translates into votes.
Thank you. So we will come back to the room for questions again, but this round we're going to go to online because I know you guys have been typing away in the chat and being very patient. So just 3 questions from online. The first one's coming from Hannah, which is, do you have suggestions on identifying influencers that might be good partners on campaigns? There are influencer agencies that some NGOs have used, or do you suppose that you should just surf around and proposition? Which is an interesting question, like how to find influencers is a big one I think lots of campaigns are thinking about at the moment. Second question coming from Freya, what sort of time frame, budget and skills did you need for the AI project? Would it be a feasible part of a smaller comms team and budget? That's from Freya, which is a really good question. And then the third one is, when the stat says 17 plays per voter, are you assuming that the viewers were all registered to vote, or did you confirm it somehow? And that's from Rachel. Cool. Over to the panel, and then we'll come back to the room.
So John can speak to how on the influencer question. This is something that excites me. So yes, we can find influencers, but this is where I think the work, and like John will have a lot about saying for sure, that we've been doing is really quite exciting, because one of the things that we found is like social listening tools are quite limited. They're like B2C tools, and they're about selling Coke to people. They're not about selling ideas to people. And so if you want to understand social media in a way that's actually about ideas and change, then like social listening is not actually that helpful. And if you just add up the number of followers somebody's got or the number of views their content has got, then that gets kind of skewed by profile or like random viral success. You can argue about how random the viral success is. So when we were doing a piece of work on climate change at TikTok, we played the world's biggest, well, I think it's probably the world's biggest ever game, Top Trumps. And people who aren't familiar with Top Trumps kind of like have the dinosaur each chip you score based on how ferocious it is or how tall it is. Pick a category and whoever does best wins the car. We did this with all the users in the sample for our climate change TikTok work, because what we wanted to look at was which users consistently produce content that has the highest levels of engagement and reaches the most people. So we chose a set of metrics and looked at the users to see who performed best, set them off in a game of Top Trumps, and ended up with our list of like the 30 users on TikTok on climate change who actually produced content that outperformed all the other users most consistently. And so we've got a list somewhere in virtual root cause HQ of like the 30 people that you've never heard of who are actually really good at climate TikTok. And at some point we need to go through that list and learn from them all. That is a roundabout way of saying, I think there is a new route to finding influence. I think we've started to develop that route. So the answer to that question, yes. Secondary question to that about how cheap this work is, and people can answer that in different ways. And like, thankfully, I think within the newsfeed community, there's probably like ways of doing things for everybody's budget. Where root causes work so far is people who tended to buy what we do tend to have like an ecosystem of people that they want to share findings and insight with. So that's kind of where I kind of think we've got the most to offer at the moment, is that, and that's kind of price-wise, is like where there's organisations that are resourced to provide stuff to multiple organisations. I'm not sure how replicable. I think some of this work would be replicable. I'll let John answer how replicable it'd be in a small comms team to use the GPT API to do some of this. You do that a bit of sense of that. There was one other question, wasn't there, about it was Hannah's question about views per voter, and I think it's literally headline grabbing maths is probably the way I would describe it, as opposed to any serious methodology that maybe John clarify. I don't know if the table will stretch this far or not.
No, it was just the number of plays divided by the number of voters.
Do you want to say anything about the technical use of the API to do the work, and like what sort of skill level you might need to start playing around with that?
You need to yeah, I think to get somewhere with this, you need to be relatively good with a bit of Python coding or that kind of thing. But actually these days, GPT itself is quite a good coder. So you can almost get it to do your coding for you, as I know some people are already doing. So yeah, it's feasible. I think it does take a bit of experience with data science though, to actually set the goals of the project and keep it within the time scale that you want to keep things within. And that takes some experience over the years. But yeah, it's not particularly expensive now though.
Any other comments? Anisha, do you want to comment on any of those, or should we go back to the room? Cool. Brill, we are going back to the room. This is very confusing. I'm like moving between chats and online and offline. Anyway, this is hybrid. We're learning hybrid here. Cool. Hands up. We've got loads of questions. Great. So at the back, your question, shout up as well, so this thing can pick you up.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, my name's Jack. I'm from an organisation called Purpose. Great presentation. Thank you for reading the report. I thought it was interesting you said that TikTok users, interesting but like probably not surprising, that TikTok users trust influencers more than brands, and like therefore I think like NGOs. And I was interested in hearing a bit more about how you measure the success of a video, and if you did any other work on kind of trust and persuasion, because I think like the idea of explainers doing well on TikTok speaks to me. Just like as a TikTok user, I see that. I can remember like, you know, working with NGOs campaigning on Human Rights Act reforms, and they're all trying to work out how to communicate it, and then one person shooting a video on their phone explaining it gets like 100,000 likes, and it just does way better than all the NGOs trying to work on it. And so that speaks to me, but then I also think, like, I also question how many of those 100,000 likes are people who don't already agree and are invested. And so I guess I have a question about whether you have looked, I guess the key recommendation about like using factual content. But as someone who worked, you know, I worked in the refugee sector for almost 10 years, and I've been spending most of that trying to convince people, like persuade my colleagues in the sector to not just like list facts all the time, because it doesn't sort of persuade people. And often I think, you know, what you were saying about articulating visions of the future, I think things like that are really important. I think shared values are really important. I guess it'd be interesting to know if there's anything in your methodology that's like measuring the success of video that's not only about the reach and engagement, because it might be that it's reaching people who already agree with framing that, like, if they share it, won't persuade people who don't agree yet. That makes sense.
Really good question. Who else has questions? Okay, we'll go over here. Yeah, just you.
Hi, yeah. I was wondering, it's kind of, I guess, a finicky thing, but I noted that promotional policy is quite low, is in terms of like a category engagement. And I was wondering how you square that with the stuff about like creating a positive vision as well in terms of like campaigning. Like, as someone works in an organisation where like we're a bit policy heavy, how does that work? And what's the difference between that and like practical? Yeah.
Cool. Third question. We will come back for another answer, don't worry. You in the third row in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering about some of the assumptions that were made around the audience and like the audience driving the areas of interest, and how much is it necessarily of audience and how much of it is platform? Because I suppose it's, you know, it says this platform to promote creativity and joy. So is it actively compressing some of that other stuff, which might be a bit drier, rather than it being a user-led experience? Obviously, it's a bit opaque being the algorithm.
Cool. Who wants to kick us off? And also, I'm hoping that people online can still hear those questions. Please do shout if you cannot, or wave at me in some way so I can see. But we'll go over to the panel. Who wants to kick off?
Well, I will start by saying that they were three excellent questions. And they're so hard that my brain is like, it's going to be really hard to try and answer them. So take them in funny order. The question about like promotional policy and like doing positive vision stuff. Really good question. I think there's an answer. You need to look at the videos that are filed under promotional policy, because I suspect it's about an interpretation that the LLM has made. So if it's okay, give me details and I will have a look at all the videos that are tagged promotional policy and see if there's an answer to that in the way that we've actually been classified. Does the TikTok algorithm suppress particular types of content and like assumptions? I don't know. It basically needs more research. But the one thing that we have found that's interesting is the climate TikTok work that stuff. Like we found that there were a lot of videos of climate change campaigners pushing petitions on TikTok, and we found, like you would expect that the more times the video gets played, the more likes it gets, like to kind of continue more people's relationship. Not if you're pushing anti-corporate petitions on climate change on TikTok, that relationship breaks down. We don't know why that is. We don't know whether it's like the algorithm generally just doesn't like it and it's like it's content that just doesn't work for the algorithm, or whether there's like some sort of TikTok type decision. We literally don't know. But we have seen an effect, like a kind of like an effect of the algorithm, and we've only done 2 substantive bits of TikTok research. So I think if we've done some more, or we were specifically looking at the issue, we might be able to learn a bit more about that. Trust and persuasion, like, no, not in this work so far. I agree about the explainers do work, like the kind of like, there are 5 people in this room who take the Ross Atkins BBC explainer model and turn it into TikTok. I'm sure TikTok's going to do very well. In terms of like measuring persuasion through the number of metrics that are actually available through the API or through something else, like, I can't think of a quick way, but John's much cleverer than me, so maybe he's got some thoughts about that.
Sorry, yeah.
And he's got some thoughts about it.
Yeah, those were really good questions, and I think really interesting. The first one I'm going to talk about is why it is that those explainer videos work so well, and I think it, is because obviously they're simple to do, but it feels like just being on FaceTime, and the person on the other end is a stranger. You're less likely to have prejudice and preconceived notions about this person and just listen to what they're saying, you can let all of that go and just take in the information and make a judgment based on the information. You might even think that the individual is an expert. I've seen a lot of other people open up with a certified health coach and this is what you should eat every day. So, that kind of stuff, it implies a shared experience, it implies that the individual is an expert, and it implies universality. And yeah, it's designed to make you comfortable with looking at a stranger and listening to them. So I think that's why those explainers work better than hearing, someone from a corporation be like, this is what I'm trying to sell you, or this is what we are trying to achieve, kind of thing. It's just more like, listen, it's just me and you in the room right now. So that's it. I do think that question about TikTok's agenda is interesting. I tried to poke Jonathan about this a while ago. But yeah, you can kind of see it around the topics that do well, so like cost of living being really well, doing really well. And then straight after that, public finances, I was thinking, is this the real picture? Does TikTok push issues that are relevant more on the global stage, but then that doesn't really work when it comes to climate change? Well, I hear there's a report on that coming out soon. But yeah, there's a lot I would be interested in finding out how, issues relating to the UK, like, do we get recommended out in that, and how does it push us into those silos with that content, if it wants to push us into those silos? But yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Great question about promotion policy. Can I add in a slide to demonstrate for the presentation? No?
Oh, do you want me to go back?
Should have added it. I added it on my
Oh
watch.
wait, hang on. I'll refresh. This is one of the great things about Google Slides. You can just refresh. Okay.
Skip the phone.
Oh,
Go to the end. Open the Yes, okay. So this is another way of looking at the particular narratives, and it sort of says how well does this particular narrative angle rank against all the other ones. So the reason why promotion policy was doing badly was because the number of videos was very low. However, it ranks pretty well in terms of the numbers of plays compared, likes, comments, shares, likes per play, comments per play, compared to the other videos. There's a lot of variation there. Like you can see these little dots show where it could end up. But it does suggest that policy promotion, having is a big mission, could actually do quite well. So yeah, thanks for picking that up. Good to dig that up. The other question about causation, changing people's minds, is kind of what you're talking about. That's actually really, really, really hard to measure. We did spend like of a couple of years with a PhD student in Indiana University, looking at how anti-vaccine misinformation influences people to not take vaccines. And this was a study over the whole of the US with all the different 3,000 counties and slightly changing the rates in the counties due to misinformation spreading in particular counties. So it is possible, but it's extremely difficult and you need a lot of data. For this kind of thing, I don't know how well it would be to measure that. Statistically, it's just a very difficult problem.
Any other comments from panelists, or can we go to more questions? I think more questions. Okay, we are going to do an interesting round where half will be from the chat and half will be from the room, because we're approaching that point. So just the first one from the chat. We've got one from, in fact, we've got two from the chat. One from Mary, which is, I note that the report, from the report, climate ranks quite low down on the issue analysis list. Do you have any insight into the discourse or lack of discourse around climate on TikTok? Which it sounds like, considering there's a report on climate and TikTok coming out, that will be a good one to answer. And then the other one, which actually is a really interesting one that I was particularly interested in too, which is TikTok doesn't like people posting petitions or political content. So anything with a signed petition, etc., seems to have been suppressed by TikTok. And that's what TikTok have said to my organization, and that's from Sam. So anything on like petition links. Yeah, we also found that. So a couple of questions from the room as well. So Paolo, we'll go to you, and then Rainey will go to you too. So Paolo, do you want to ask?
Thanks very much. It was really interesting. I have just finished a European project with a large-scale survey of TikTok users, and much of these resonated with my research, especially in terms of positivity, optimism, and in terms of being more active than the average, in terms of politics and more critical than average. So yeah, we've been share with you about all the out there. But one question I had, perhaps the only question that remained unanswered that I had in your report was if you have any sense of political positioning on the political spectrum of videos and content creators. I think it's quite complex, but I was wondering whether you have any data on that or any hypotheses on how much the distribution is on the left or on the right, yeah? And how much of the videos are ideologically left or ideologically right, progressive or conservative, because I think perhaps this is a question that is really interesting. I'm wondering whether, of course, it's something very difficult, but if there's ways to use large language models to explore the time.
Cool. Rainey, your question?
Really good presentation. Lots to think about. Thank you very much for sharing. I wondered if you did any sort of analysis on the actual content. So we talked about the descriptions and the hashtags. So did you do any sort of analysis on the actual content and the length of these videos? And I wondered if that had any sort of influence on it. And also who, were there some people that were basically doing all the work? So when these videos, what was the distribution? So how we looked at the videos, were there, specific accounts that perhaps gave rise to a lot of these videos? That'll be interesting to find out. Sorry, and the final question, more on the sort of technical part, was that did you use any sort of standard APIs from TikTok, or was it research TikTok, or what did we use to do this?
Cool, some great technical questions there. So over to the panel, who wants to go first? Okay, Sean?
In terms of analysis of content, the main thing we did was we took a sample of 100, was it? not 400, it's like 200.
Yeah, 200.
200 videos. We classified them with the AI, and then we asked 2 humans, who will remain to assess how well the AI classification had done in terms of how accurate it was. And we found that it was pretty accurate, 80% of the time. I think it was around that kind of level. Was in the high, very accurate region. So there's that. Content creators, there's a section in the report on which are the big content creators who are producing which content. The API we used was actually a company called Ensemble Data, who have a multiple TikTok accounts and will do searches with the different accounts as an ensemble and feed the data to us. So it was a kind of scraping approach. We don't have access to the academic API. That was that. Left versus right. Hello. We did classify left versus right. I remember we didn't write it up. But it was very strongly left biased. And you could tell that from the amount of content attacking which you see now and the different issues that are being talked about. I can't remember exactly what we asked them to quantify left versus right, and we had long discussions about, is this just attacking the government or is this attacking the Conservatives' way of thinking? And then it's quite not always easy to tell the difference. So we kind of decided that we wanted to think more about that. But I mean, just anecdotally, it's pretty extreme bias.
Also, one thing that like we started out talking about was like, can we look at like all of political TikTok? And we're like, okay, let's go down the like really interesting sort of alt-right wormholes. And then we realized that that was such a huge scope. So we decided to scope it to like mainstream UK politics. But I'm sure if you looked up particular hashtags that were more like right-leaning, you would discover a lot of things going on under the surface. But we did restrict to mainstream TikTok. But that is an interesting area of future research, which will be interesting to look into.
Yeah, just add to that. Like, I think there's if you were like, so go back to Nigel Farage, come full circle. If you are him, you're going after like people who like royal family TikTok. Like you're going looking for the TikTok niches and infiltrating them. You're not like going to talk to people who are like, that's the non-pejorative term I can use, like people who choose to use the UK politics hashtag. Like that's a particular type of TikTok user. And so I think there's loads. Don't take from this that like the right isn't an organised or significant actor on TikTok. It is, but this research doesn't go down that track. In terms of left-right analysis, though, John also may have lots of in-depth discussions. I, in particular, Hannah and John didn't mind that much. I found the LLM classification of the left and right a really blunt tool. Partly because, like, is someone, as I said, is someone kicking off about the government, or are they kicking off about right-wing politics? Like, I mean, so it's really, ideology is really hard to pick apart in that way, particularly really limited on domestic data. So we did look at it, but it was like, it's quite something. You can use the LLM to try and do it, but you're going to need some pretty good data to do it well. And then, yes, we manually check the videos. Climate change, to the question online about climate change. So yeah, we did some work that is in a different format for a client looking at the climate change conversation on TikTok. So we looked at way more videos actually than for this, and looked at the structure of the like different topics people talk about climate change, and we looked particularly at influential users. We're in the process of like repackaging that work so that we can publish it, but we do have some insights to share. I won't share them now. And then, is TikTok artificially like? So someone's been told that TikTok artificially suppresses politics chat. Like, I mean, I personally find that quite interesting because I think, given the demographics, at least at the moment, that have the weight of use on TikTok, I think if people knew that they were kind of like being silent, they themselves were being silenced in quite an individual way, a little bit more evidence on that might be quite interesting to do something like. Yeah.
Just on that petition point as well, we ran a little experiment where we put some TikTok videos out, had a petition link, absolutely zero like people clicking through to the petition link. So I think there is a sense that if you're trying to take people off platform, there's like a disincentive to do that. Also, people generally on TikTok, I don't know about you, but you're very rare to actually click to go off the platform. You are basically in that tunnel and enjoying whatever weird and wacky journey you're on. So, like, I think generally we know from experience that trying to take off platform doesn't seem to work at the moment. Just to go back to Sam's question.